when you engage employees in the brand building process, it creates a culture shift. So what happens is most of the time, branding is delivered by agencies and management. But if you shift and get people from sales and logistics and distribution and customer service and all the frontline people inside of your organization participating, even in a small way, it creates this opportunity for them to understand the business, to make a meaningful contribution, and actually get engaged with why you are building your brand. And every time I have done a project with employee co-creation, the residual impact in terms of employee engagement, employee enthusiasm, in terms of employees speaking up and telling leadership how they think the company should be run and giving ideas and just contributing, that goes up exponentially. And that's not something you can get if you outsource all of your creative work to a third party.
Aloha, and welcome to the Groundswell Marketing Podcast, where I connect you with outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. Today's guest is Jeremy Miller. He's the founder of Sticky Branding, which happens to be the name of his first book, which has been a best-selling book in itself. He's also out with a new book called Brand New Name, which is what we're going to talk about today. He's been a brand strategist for a number of years. He's a keynote speaker and definitely understands this space. This new book is actually really incredible. I've read it myself, and as we go through this podcast, he really breaks down how to get multi-stakeholders in the process and involving your organization in a systematic way to really come up with an original name that really suits your business and your brand. So without further ado, let's paddle in. Welcome to the show, Jeremy Miller.
Pleasure to be here.
Hey, buddy. Great chatting with you the last half an hour. We should have almost recorded about 20% of that conversation.
Well, that's why we get to chat now and record it all.
Right on. Well, let's just jump right into it. You got a book coming out. Mm-hmm. Tell us about it.
So the new book is called Brand New Name, and it is a graphically designed branding book that shows you how to name or rename anything.
What do you mean rename?
Well, so a lot of the time, companies will start out in life with a name. Let's take it as an older family business. Maybe they called themselves A1, and it was great for the Yellow Pages 30 years ago. But since there's no Yellow Pages anymore, it's a terrible name. And so we go through situations in life where a name doesn't work for our product or our company anymore, and we have to change. And so that's where renaming kicks in. Or if you're starting a new business or launching a new product or anything along those lines, then you need a name for that too. Naming is probably one of those fundamental constructs of branding, but it's one of those things that either doesn't get a lot of attention or people just try to get through it because it's hard and difficult and there's no real good process on how to execute it.
What's the difference between a name and a brand?
Well, your brand is how you are known. So it's your reputation. There's that classic quote from Jeff Bezos. He said that your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And I like that quote a lot. I think it does capture it. But I think your name is it's a part of your brand, but it's that thing that people know. And so the metaphor I would use for that is your name is like a label on a file folder in your customer's mind. When they think of you as an individual, they think of Scott. When they think of your company and your podcast, they think of Groundswell. And those labels or those categories or those vessels that hold all the meaning that represent who you are and every interaction we've had with you. And it's the label of your brand is the name.
Makes sense. So, I'm sure other people out there can, identify with this, but why do you think some people make no effort whatsoever to make a name? Like I literally will see ABC grocery or something. And in my world, marketing, I'm just like, did you not even show up to try? Like, are you hoping to be successful? Or is that a legitimate branding strategy? Go.
I think so I'll tell you a funny story. So one of my good friends is a serial entrepreneur and we've both grown up together. And he had gone through the process being in the action or the action sports and clothing business and being very brand centric. And then coming out of his third business, the business essentially didn't succeed, and he was very beat up and trying to find success. And so he created. Out of a bit of desperation, got to feed your family. He created a post-construction cleaning company, and in the span of less than a year, he grew it to over $1 million in revenue, and it was running at 40% profit. It was great little business. But his approach to branding was hilarious. He said, basically, everything my instincts say I should do, I'm going to do the opposite. So his business cards were basically printed at Staples, and they looked terrible. The name of the company was named after his kids. It was J&M Post Construction Cleaning. The website probably had an error message on it. I think it was probably on purpose. It was just everything in the marketing was just batshit crazy awful. And the whole point of it, though, was people weren't buying him for the quality of his brand and his identity. They were hiring him for the services. And so I think there's a whole world out there that don't need fancy branding and fancy marketing, that they just exist. Like, you don't care who your cleaning lady is, or you don't need to know the name of your mechanic. You need to know that the person is reliable and can get things done. Whereas when you go to a grocery store and you're looking for coffee or a specific product, then the name means a lot more.
So I should feel shame for quietly judging the person that named their store ABC Grocery. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, if he's making bank, then yeah,
I guess so.
Why?
They didn't appear to be. I see in these cases when I look at this, I'm like going, this doesn't look like a winning strategy, but hey, somebody out there is. So I'm sure of it.
I think that's a really astute observation, and that is, competing today without a brand is very hard. And so I can give you lots of examples of organizations that don't need a brand. But that's actually becoming fewer and fewer today. When somebody, like, just take any industry, whether you're financial services or insurance or hairdresser, we are going online and we are looking people up. And so if you find someone, they don't have a website, or their social media is out of date, or their logo looks like they bought it at Vistaprint, those all become things that we judge someone by. And so we are judging by the quality of their marketing and the quality of their presentation. And if it's out of date or out of line, then yeah, you're going to judge it for sure.
You're almost better to be a minimalist if you don't have the time to put into a full site. I think some people go for the full gamut, but they don't do anything very well. I think that tends to be a common thing, or their branding is not connected to different social networks, or the branding name and the style and stuff doesn't fit how they do it offline versus online and stuff like that. So how does that fit in? Like, I know you're talking about brand and naming specifically, but how does that impact all channels, or does it?
What do you mean in terms of?
Well, yeah, if you got a name, like right now in the digital age, it matters. Does it matter that you're a web business and the naming is different than if you're an offline business, or does both? And then, of course, now with the advent of voice and people doing voice search, how will that affect branding, for example?
Well, I think in this brand naming specifically, I think your name is your most important marketing asset. And especially with the rise of voice, because that's changing the way we interact with organizations. And so having a brand name that identifies your company, yourself, your product, your service, that's the thing you're going to be known by. And so when you're talking to Alexa and you say, hey, I'm looking for a marketing podcast, you might say, I'm looking for the Groundswell Marketing Podcast. Or if you're looking for Lululemon, you might say, hey, Siri, show me the closest directions to Lululemon. And as I do that, Siri goes off on my phone. Oh yeah, she's always listening. But that's what these voice search tools do. So that name is how we are interacting with things. One of the things I think is really interesting on this, though, is at least in the high-end professional services world, we are starting to see it's a niche, but I'm seeing a trend towards advisors essentially terminating their digital marketing footprint. They're closing the website. They might be on LinkedIn, but they're not doing any social media sharing or posting, but they're incredibly busy and they're getting a ton of referrals. And what's actually happening is it's like the speakeasy in New York where it doesn't have a sign or a website or anything like that, but everybody knows it. Like there's the one that Please Don't Tell, where you've got to go into a hot dog restaurant through it and into a phone booth to get into the bar. And so what we see though is if you need a specialist, you don't care what their marketing looks like. You want them for their reputation. If you blow up your knee and you need to get your ACL fixed or some kind of specialized surgery, you're going to look for the best surgeon in your area, and their marketing doesn't matter. And so this is where your brand kicks in again. It's that reputation and how people come to know you and find you, and however that takes place, that's your strategy. And when you execute on that and you execute it on it with purpose, that's actually where the magic of the brand building journey takes place.
I agree. There's also this component where I'm always find it like almost like really clever of the branding, component or a strategy when it's really it's either got like sometimes a hidden meaning that wasn't apparent, and you kind of as you dig deeper into the business, it gives a little bit of more life or soul to the business. I'm trying to think of one right now. It's a number, and it represents the jail number cell of women that were jailed somewhere in Southeast Asia, and I'm wrecking it right now. But at first, the name didn't mean much, but when you heard the backstory of what this guy that started this foundation, he made this connection with this woman that was from the cell number, and that's how the brand became. So, I kind of like, I don't know what your thought is, like, how does that, when you're kind of planning naming and putting that in your strategy, do you bring forward some of these sort of components to add soul to it, or is that kind of trying too hard to make it into something it isn't?
If you can do it, I think it's brilliant. To be able to tell a story like that is like the cell number of a person that represents your brand is just an incredible story. One of the stories I tell on the book is a British travel site called Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And in the UK, Mr. and Mrs. Smith is a pseudonym for a naughty weekend. And so what happened after World War II is unwed couples would go out for a weekend, and instead of putting in their real names, they'd write in the pseudonym Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And so that kind of kicked off. And so now you got this brand that's based on that subtext of Mr. and Mrs. Smith or the naughty weekends. They have a very cheeky brand, and it plays up to that sexuality and that fun and quirky elements to it. And so whenever you can tell a story of where your name comes from and what it means, it just adds layers of depth to your brand, and it helps people to identify with you.
So when you're going through a branding exercise, like you and I both talk, we both consult on branding, and you're working with a client. How do you draw out those stories? Because sometimes you just have to dig for it. Like there's gems in there, or is it something that they bring forward, or do you have a process for pulling that out, so to speak?
So what I advocate for in my practice and also in the book Brand New Name is a model of employee co-creation. And what I have learned just in working on branding projects for many, many years is that within every organization, there is just immense creative potential. You and I are creative individuals, but everybody is born a creative individuals. The problem is, as we get busy, as we mature, we have that creative genius kind of beaten out of us. We start to believe that our ability to be creative is tied to our ability to draw or our ability to complete the arts. But it's not. It's our ability to create. It's ability to generate ideas. And so I really believe the way to get to stories is not through complex exercises, but it's to be using the people inside the organization who know the business, who know the stories, who know the lore, and they live it and they breathe it every day. And so what we do in Brand New Name is a 3-step process. Name something. The first week, in the first stage, we build a naming strategy. That's to clearly identify what it is you want and why you're naming what you want. And then in part 2, there's a 5-day naming sprint that is a set of exercises so that it helps employees generate lots and lots of ideas. And the third week, we go through testing and selection. There's a set of tools and process for evaluating a name. Now, one of the exercises that we go through in week two in the naming sprint is to look at the stories and the systems and the language that you use inside of your organization. And that actually brings out some of the most interesting and intriguing ideas because we have names that we associate to products, to systems, to people inside our organizations every single day, and we just haven't put a spotlight on them. And a consultant or an outsider is not going to see them, but employees with given the task to find it are actually the best people to find those hidden little stories that they know so intuitively, but they just need to be asked some of the right questions.
That was something you and I had some discussion about when we first chatted, I believe, on the phone. You were telling me that, and we both agree on that. The one thing I think, and you probably can say the same thing, is you get bigger buy-in when you move along more people inside the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because branding, if you do it in isolation, how are you going to get the team to really buy into what that brand represents as you do the building blocks?
Right.
What's been your experience?
That's exactly it. It's when you engage employees in the brand building process, it creates a culture shift. So what happens is most of the time, branding is delivered by agencies and management. But if you shift and get people from sales and logistics and distribution and customer service and all the frontline people inside of your organization participating, even in a small way, it creates this opportunity for them to understand the business, to make a meaningful contribution, and actually get engaged with why you are building your brand. And every time I have done a project with employee co-creation, the residual impact in terms of employee engagement and employee enthusiasm, in terms of employees speaking up and telling leadership how they think the company should be run and giving ideas and just contributing, that goes up exponentially. And that's not something you can get if you outsource all of your creative work to a third party.
That's one of the things I just loved about the work I've seen, the conversations we've had. You're incredibly smart about how you approach this. I think one of the things that most people don't recognize is that a lot of times, an agency or a consultant come in and they try to make themselves the hero. And whether you really stay this or not, like I'm looking at it going, what you're doing is you're making the people inside the company the hero to really buy in and to adopt it and to feel like they had their hands all over it rather than go, this great, amazing company did this for us.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we did it for us. And I really like that approach. That's something that I've adopted, but you've taken it to a whole different level. Is that part of this book? Like, do you kind of break down how to engage with employees?
That's the essence of the book. So what Brand New Name argues is that there's been three traditional ways to name things. You could hire an agency or a consultant. You can do it yourself and muddle around and try and figure it out. Or maybe you can use a crowdsourcing site. But what I found was, and comes from being a serial entrepreneur. This is actually my 15th year now as an entrepreneur, and not only naming multiple products and businesses for myself, but also going through this journey with clients, is that those three things aren't very efficient and effective. And so this book came out of just that invention, or necessity is the mother of all invention, that we kept asking ourselves, what's a better way? And trying to build agency services to solve these problems was becoming very complex, very expensive, and not delivering the kind of results we expected for clients. And so where it came from was asking, how else can we do that? And that natural answer was, is employee co-creation. How do we get people to do that? And so the entire methodology and process of the book is based on the model that inside your organization's immense creative potential, and if we give you process and you use your people, you can solve this naming problem probably better than any outsider could do for you.
So when you go through the process with people solving the naming problem, how do you get down to and I know my process, and I have a good idea because I've read your book, so it's a little bit of a leading question, but how do you get somebody to differentiate between a name that says exactly what you do to a name that means nothing, or it's a version of a word that people recognize? Like, how do you go through that process? Is that early on, or is it later once you got a general concept down?
Well, I think the first thing people have to recognize is the complexity of naming. So there's a chapter in the book called The Anatomy of a Name where we show the three kinds of categories of names. So you can have a descriptive names that tells you exactly what it is. So you think of TripAdvisor or Netflix. These are, or even Kellogg's cornflakes. It just tells you what you're buying. There's not a lot of excitement in it, but there could be. Like you could have a really evocative descriptive name like Big Ass Fans, that which make literally big ass fans. And so those are descriptive names. You can have suggestive names. Those indicate what it's like. And so brands like Slack and Twitter are examples of suggestive names. Or
Mhm.
you can have an abstract name. This is where the name doesn't mean anything. It's like Kodak or Acura or Verizon. And those are invented words. Apple would be another example of a real world that a real word that it has no meaning, that it has been imbued with the brand. And so what we try to do first and foremost is show an organization there is lots of options when it comes down to naming, and understanding the creative options gives you permission to be more creative in your journey. Now, what we do in terms of the naming sprint is we help you to create descriptive names, suggestive names, abstract names, invented words, constructed words. We get you to do lots of different activities to generate lots of different ideas, but it's the strategy and the testing is where it separates everything, because there's no such thing as a bad name. There's only a bad strategy. So if you're trying to create a name for a retirement living center, calling it Purple Taco is probably a bad idea. But if you have a clear idea of what you're naming and why you're naming it, then you can go through the creative process. You come up with those wacky ideas. They may not fit, but when you're testing and selecting and look at your options against your strategy, that's where you will choose the name that makes the most sense. And usually it's in that full loop of understanding your options, clear strategy, lots of ideas, and testing that gives you that journey or that process to get to the name that you want.
So how do you get like make a decision, say between, we'll say, I'm just going to simplify it, two options. We'll call one, shoes, and the other one is called blue lace. And the one you got to kind of explain what it is. So you got to just, you got to build a brand around it. The other one is like shoes, go to shoes.com. It's straight up. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's naming, right? That's not the brand. So maybe that becomes the brand. So at what point do you go, hey, this makes sense for you just to call it shoes? Because I mean, you and I both believe there's so much potential in building a brand, but some businesses, don't you agree that it makes sense just to call it what it is?
For sure. If that's your strategy, call it for what it is. One of the things I would be looking at in this case, though, is what are the naming trends in your industry? And so I'd create a namescape and map out what are the other competitors, direct or indirect, naming their products or services that are relevant to you. And
Mhm.
what you want to see is what are the common used words? What are the common naming conventions? Is everybody calling themselves, if everyone's using a descriptive name, then maybe you need to use a subjective or an abstract name as a way to differentiate yourself. So the question for me is not, is it shoes.com versus blue lace? The question is, what's going to fit the strategy and what's going to make your brand stand out in a way that connects with customers? The brand, though, will be based on the business you build. So if you are delivering exceptional service, exceptional value, exceptional products, and people know you, like you, and trust you, then they're going to have happy, positive vibes associated to that name.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, case in point, Zappos. What does that really mean?
Mm.
And yet they're world renowned for
Mm-hmm.
their customer service and their brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what frustrates you the most about the process of naming or creating a brand?
Before, it was the lack of process and the time that it would take me to do it. When I named my family business, this was my first naming project. I changed the company name from Miller and Associates to Leap Job. And that project took me about 250 hours. It was 3 months of grinding for day after day after day just to find that available.com and the evocative name and testing it and all that kind of stuff. And so what I think frustrated me the most is not having a methodology in order to do this efficiently. And so that was really what drove me in writing this book is how do we do this in say 2 to 4 weeks? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't compromise quality? And so that was what I was really trying to solve.
What about the time it takes for things to sort of incubate and sort of like take seed, if you will, like take root with the organization? Because sometimes I feel like when I've done, when I try to rush things too much in terms of this naming process, it just feels that it just needs a little bit of time with the team to kind of sit with them.
Mhm.
How does that play into your process, or does it just eliminate that?
No, that's actually baked into this by design. So the number one question I often get when I'm talking to someone is they've left naming too late and they're in a panic and they need a name like tomorrow.
Oh yeah,
And
totally.
they're like, I'm freaking out. And so they're like, can we do a half day workshop just to generate a bunch of ideas and pick something out? And my short answer to that is no. That when you do something too fast, you don't actually allow time to percolate, and you don't allow ideas to build up, and you tend to go to groupthink and a fast decision. So the
Right.
reason that my methodology is on average 3 weeks is that we want to create proper time to build a strategy. Not a lot of time. We're talking less than 5 days, but you want time to build a strategy, time 5 days to generate as many ideas as possible, because the other part of this is nobody's got time to spend 40 hours on this. So by getting say all of the employees engaged in this in a broad spectrum, we get a lot of people contributing say an hour a day for 5 days, and you can generate 500, 1,000, 1,500 potential names. But then again, you want that time at the end of the cycle to test and select. So another week or two to be able to look and sit and wrestle with the ideas, see which ones resonate in your market, which ones have the highest recall, so that you can make the right decision.
What like when you go through the process of creating a name with a client, and when they come to the end, is it just like one obvious choice, or are they making a decision between several different ideas and concepts?
Sometimes the obvious one, you just see it. Like, so the name Mr. and Mrs. Smith, James Lohan said to me that they'd spent they didn't use the brand new name methodology, but they'd gone through the brainstorming process for a few weeks. And then over a boozy lunch, his buddy said to him, what do you call it, Mr. and Mrs. Smith? And at that moment, they just knew that was the name and they just ran with it. And so you have those moments of clarity, but that, in my experience, is not the average. Most of the time, we're sitting wrestling with one. I just went through a naming sprint in the last month with a startup here in the Toronto area where I'm based, and we had a short. So we went through the sprint, and they generated 682 names. We through polling and reduction, we took that to 40, and we reduced that again after we went through trademark searches down to 10. We tested it to a short list of 5, but it boiled down to 2 names. And we had to go back and forth to ask those strategic questions of not where's the brand today, where do we think the brand will be 3 to 5 years from now? And we had to try on each name for size
Mm-hmm.
so that we could make a decision. And sometimes that helps, and other times you just sit there and you hem and you haw, and you just got to go, you know what, this is the right name for me, and just pull the trigger.
How many times have you come up with a name that you're like, oh my God, this is the perfect name? Fingers crossed, you do a trademark search or you search the .com because it's important, and you don't get it, or it's maybe the trademark is available in Canada but not in the US, or whatever that is. How many times does that happen to you in that situation?
I think you have to assume that to find one name that you can own, you're going to have to create 20 names that aren't going to pass.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to set that
You,
expectation with the client probably up front so they know they don't get too emotionally attached.
well, and it's funny. Usually, we start out with that situation where they have a name that they absolutely love,
Oh,
and
the
for what,
sacred
and like,
cow?
well, yeah, and that's exactly, well, there's a trademark issue. So the reason we did this naming sprint with the startup here in Toronto was that they can't operate in the US because of a trademark restriction. So they have to change it, but they love their name. And so we actually had a little ceremony at the start of the project to basically, we created a little gravestone and a graphic and put the logo on it and said, okay, we have to put this name to rest so that we can go on and find something else.
That's brilliant.
So
It's like,
you're having a
it's true
funeral
though. You
party
have to
for me.
actually kill it because people just hold
Yeah,
on to it. They'll like
yeah,
spend so much time going, but we can't go back.
yeah,
Did they
yeah.
try to do a modification of that brand just to get around the trademark?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. There's like in the 680 names, there's probably 300 of them. They're all variants that are all kind of compromises. But where we are landing, and I can't, unfortunately, can't reveal the name until the trademark's completed. Where we're landing is in something that's way more evocative and way more powerful. But what I can tell you is we are experiencing a naming drought right now. If you think about it, all the .coms you ever want to get are probably registered right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a domain crisis. We have a trademark crisis. We are experiencing a naming drought. It's actually fascinating. In the United States alone, there are 546,000 new small businesses started every single month. And so at any given point, 2% of the population is starting a business today. So all these companies are generating names, they're all generating websites, and some are generating trademarks. So we have to go in and assume we're probably not generating the names that we need. Or you're going to come up with a situation where you're going to have to look hard to find that name.
Mm-hmm. So, how is it going to look in the future? I mean, it's only going to get more crowded. What's the solution?
I well, I think it's like real estate. You're going to have to be buying domains and buying names. We're going to have to be much more into a trademark world of this, but it's only going to get harder. And so the only thing I see potentially alleviating some of the pressure is the rise of artificial intelligence in the creative process.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Makes you wonder if, creative design is going to be left to the robots and all the creatives are going to be out of job.
I would say no, but so there's Looka, which was formerly Logo Joy, which is doing AI based logo design.
Yeah, I've seen
And
that.
what I think is it's doing good work. And we're seeing now, I don't see the same horsepower yet in the naming front, but it's going to come there. And what this is doing is it's democratizing design the same way that Fiverr has done it, that we can get access to cost effective resources that can get us part of the way there. And what it's doing is it's raising the floor. And so all that does is we are constantly raising our game in terms of what our brand standards, what is quality, what are expectations. And
Mm-hmm.
by doing that, we're going to just see better branding. When you don't need, when a startup can go on to Looka and create a really nice logo for $45 US, that ups the game.
What brand do you think is the coolest brand? Like name and brand?
Oh, that's a tough one.
You must have a favorite, like in the top 10.
My two favorites are Twitter and Buffer on just for the suggestive names, but I think Tesla, in terms of that hat tip to Nikolai Tesla, is brilliant.
Nice. And which one are you most proud of with your clients over the past number of years?
Oh, there's a lot. You know, because so this is a different. Not trying to avoid the answer, but what I find in doing naming sprints and having people do the creative work themselves using employee co-creation,
Mm-hmm.
my pride is actually not in the products that they create because I'm not creating them. What I'm proud of is the work that they do. So, for example, there's a restaurant group out of Seattle called E3 Restaurant Group, and they chose that name because it was they were going through their succession to the third generation of leadership. Up until that point, they had been known as Consolidated Restaurants Inc., CRI, and so it was a name they weren't proud of. And E3 came from the seasoning spice that's used in all of their restaurants all over the Pacific Northwest. But the name was a hat tip to Earl Owens, who was their executive chef from the 80s from the Metropolitan Grill, who created this season spice. E3 is the third version of this. And that came through that in story that they knew that meant something to them. And so their pride in the work that they created is actually where I'm getting my pride from, is that I'm just so happy that people are able to use this process and create outcomes that they love and that they're proud of.
Awesome. And when you're doing this creative process, you're you're kind of a change agent. You're affecting the organization. You're kind of, working with all these different individuals in, different departments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like you're saying, you're enjoying the process, but also it must be kind of cool to sort of see somebody who's not typically involved in the creative process, like an engineer or something, and they come up with something and it really contributes in a way on the creative process. Because usually the creative is left to a small group of individuals in most organizations. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I think is really interesting about your process.
100%. So what I have found is the names that typically make the shortlist are not coming from marketing. They're coming from people totally disconnected from management and leadership, and they see the stories, and they just have these creative ideas. And so as leaders, I think the opportunity is actually in acknowledging and rewarding and celebrating the contributions that people make to the process, because how cool is it that a line cook in a restaurant can contribute a name that becomes a brand, or an engineer working in a software company who's pounding out lines of code all day suddenly comes up with a name that becomes a product. Those moments are so unusual, but they become such moments of pride, not only for the organization, but the individuals who contributed them.
Right on. Well, that's awesome. What do you think? Like where's branding going to go in terms of AI now? Like you mentioned that before. Do you think that there's going to be, I don't know, like brands that are robot AI brands and brands that are just 100% human? That's another differentiator somehow. Or where do you think it could go? Like, where do you think if you were to think way in the future, like how is this whole naming and branding going to look?
Well, I think AI is so much bigger than naming and branding. And you can see hints of this already, where McDonald's actually bought an AI and machine learning company last year, and they spent a whole wackadoo of money on it. But the purpose of that data that they were, or the purpose of the AI, what they were trying to do is to be able to connect their marketing to their operations. And what they are doing is they are not only getting personalized data from you on how you're using the app, but they're also connecting this data now to what's going on in the kitchen, what's happening in the checkout line. And so now, as it's making recommendations of what they should upsell you, can be based on what can they feasibly serve from the kitchen based on the current capacity. So if viewers want, maybe they're going to recommend French fries, whereas if it's a little bit slower, maybe they're going to recommend a shake or something else. So this idea of both personalization and operational efficiency, tying marketing to operations and contextualizing that for the client, to me, that's the future of what AI brings. But it's also kind of scary, because the scary part of this will be there's not much need for a human being to deliver services. Think of this from a banking context. Why do we talk to a human being to get a mortgage? Couldn't we use a voice activated assistant like Siri or Alexa and talk to our banking app? Because our bank knows all the data. We actually could be using personal assistants or personal AI assistants to help complete common financial transactions like getting a mortgage, applying for a loan, getting car insurance, all those types of things. We could eliminate the human beings from that in our process.
I think it probably will over time. I mean, you're seeing the self service even in fast food and banking being more pervasive because of the convenience. But I think some people just want that human interaction when it comes to their money. They just maybe there's a certain level of trust. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's where we are right now. But I see, especially going into the U.S., that that expectation is declining constantly. That we already know that in terms of wealth management, that investable assets under 10 million are probably being largely managed by robots already. All we have is
Right.
a talking head that's telling us that they're making personalized decisions on where our money's being allocated, but there's a lot of robots going into that process. So, is the human being just giving us the comfort that we're not all being managed by robots? I don't know. I think once maybe it's Generation Z or the generation behind that will start to call BS and see that this is something that we actually are interacting with computers, and it's okay because they actually do a really good job.
I honestly went to the bank, no joke, 2 days ago for the first time where I physically
Uh-huh.
walked in my bank and had to deposit something. And I was unbelievably impatient because I was like, there was some older people that just had some maybe really complicated transactions. So I was there longer than I was really hoping to be there. So because I'm so
Hmm.
used to using everything online, and it's pretty clear to me. I think the biggest path you can follow is frictionless. Anytime something's easier, faster, over time, it just wins. People just want to save time. That's the number one thing. So I think you're right. I think it's
And,
just a matter of time and generational shift more than anything else.
and isn't that what the brand building process is all about? That if someone saves you time and convenience, and gives you back opportunities so you can do other things, isn't that going to enhance your loyalty and appreciation of the brand?
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're saving me time. It's another way of it's saving. It's more than saving money. I value convenience so much. Like being able to save time. I'll pay more for convenience if it saves me time.
For sure. And that, I think, is where I will shift a little bit on this branding conversation. For me, branding isn't the conversation on logos, taglines, or even names. I think branding is in that true structural side of how you interact with your customers and deliver value. And it's in your operation, it's in your where you're defining your category and subcategory. It's in the way you create time, or however you define your value proposition. And it's in the work that you do that is ultimately your branding. And all we're doing in marketing is just amplifying and telling that story.
Totally true. I mean, I think a lot of people get too caught up in thinking that the perfect name and the design of that name and the front facing visuals are going to make it succeed for you, and it's just not. It's so much more than that. Every interaction matters now than more than ever because people want to have human connection, or they want to have convenience, or they want to have whatever it is your brand's delivering, and that's what they're measuring, not necessarily how great your brand name is.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
Yeah. So if you think of it, a great name won't make a bad business, but a great name will definitely add value to a good business. So that what it does is it makes it more memorable. It makes it stand out for the marketplace. It creates that greater affinity and appreciation. But the big mistake I watch a lot of startups and small businesses do is they overemphasize their marketing at the expense of doing the work. Like, my pet peeve is watching small business owners spending like 6 hours a day on Instagram and posting live stories constantly, and trying to be like Gary Vaynerchuk, and live streaming their business, and not realizing that, oh, wait, my business is about serving the customers, and every hour I spend on Instagram isn't actually serving them.
Totally agree to that one. And a lot of people don't understand. I know Gary and had a past guest, Brittany, who worked with him. And what most people understand is he has a large team and a system that's well ingrained, that's spending a lot of money to deliver against that. And I think people misunderstand, what he's saying. I think what he's espousing is that, you need to get your story out there, but within the realm of delivering against your customers. And you're right. If you spend too much time marketing, then you would be better spent to service your customers and make them happy and get word of mouth, because bring more business than anything else. And I think that's another thing that's missing, I think, in today's environment is word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Like that needs to be the focus, because the social media, just attention is just going down. Where do you see branding in terms of social? Like, where are people missing their brand? What are they disconnecting with social media when they should really? You said one thing, which is time spent, but where else are you seeing that?
Well, I think social is one of those things. Go back to Gary for a second. So what Gary is doing is absolutely brilliant. He's got a substantial team that is producing 100 pieces of content per day per channel. Like, he's just a machine. But he's not doing this for personal branding. He is marketing and creating a platform that demonstrates their capabilities in terms of an agency. He's got his investment business. He's got his wine. He's got multiple things going on, and this is all strategic. And he is monetizing it every single day. This is part of a larger strategy. And so I am a big believer that social is one of the biggest gifts you could ever have, especially when it comes to connecting with your customers. The challenge that we face as business owners and as marketers is the ever the never-ending noise just gets louder and louder and louder. And so the reality in social when it comes to marketing and branding today is I don't believe you can operate on organic anymore, at least from an advertising, a promotion perspective. You've got to pay to play, even on Instagram. So we're running ads more. We're using content that drives back to landing pages. So you've got to be not only producing a lot that is engaging content that creates conversations, you also have to be willing to pay and put ads up so that you're actually delivering an outcome.
So the paid ad thing is interesting because a lot of times, I mean, right now on social, it's affordable. But what if for a lot of businesses that the ad rate changes? It increases 2, 3 times. That no longer becomes viable. What do you say to somebody that doesn't necessarily have a marketing budget?
We're all going to do what we're going to do. So it's not to say that you have to advertise on social. Like before, people couldn't afford to advertise on television, so they started advertising on Facebook, and then Facebook got more expensive, so they switched to Instagram. So we're going to keep evolving to the channels and the platforms that make
Mm-hmm.
sense. And I think we're also being conditioned, and this is actually kind of remarkable and sad at the same time, but Google and Facebook and all of these major social networks have convinced us that even if we're in a business to business arena, we need to allocate, say, 5, 10, if not 30% of revenue to be spending on pay per click or social ad campaigns. And that's a shocking, surreal realization that average companies are going out and saying, you know what, we need to spend 10,000 a month, 50,000 a month, whatever it is, because that's how we generate leads.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases that works. I think that you're seeing a lot of businesses that are looking at bringing forward value with content and concepts that people connect to. I recognize that organic reach is obviously still going down on most of the platforms, but like you said earlier, like if you have a reputation and people are talking about you, I believe that's actually got more strength than trying to buy your way through it. I do. I'm not against buying.
Yeah,
I
I
just
think
think it's the
that's
last
where
dollar, not the
PR
first
comes
dollar.
in, right?
What's that?
And that'd be where PR starts to kick in. That you're using, well, and podcasting and other things. That the act of building your reputation so that you have word of mouth is still a strategy and it's still content. It's probably still costing you money. None of this happens for free.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, it's like creating content. People actually think that that's like, oh, that's all free. I mean, it sucks up your resources of your business. Plus, if you're producing a lot of content like podcasting or making video, there's a significant cost attached to that. So it's like, what, in
Mhm.
your opinion, like just from what you're doing in your experience, where do you see the split between how much you'd want to pay and how much organic content you want to create? I guess every business is different. It's a different strategy. I get that, but in your sort of experience, like what do you see as being more of a winning strategy?
I think it's going to depend very much on the business and the culture of the business. So the average business is not going to be in the content marketing world. That they don't have the entrepreneur that wants to have a personal brand. They're a true quote unquote retail or B2B business, and their job is to get people into their store or into their website and generate a lead and generate some piece of business so they can do work with them. And in that kind of circumstance, the pay per click or a paid advertising strategy is probably going to be more effective than doing a blogging or podcasting strategy because you're probably not going to be brilliant at content. Where I would say the differing factor comes down is if you have an entrepreneur or a leader who wants to build a personal brand, then content is a very powerful tool there because then you're creating a voice that complements the business and now you're personalizing the brand. And there's lots of instances, the Gary Vaynerchuk's a perfect example where you have this massive personal brand attached to essentially three pretty substantial businesses that he is able to point his lens at and create a lot of value. So but there's different approaches. I'm a big in terms of sticky branding. We use a lot of content, PR, and community engagement as our platform for creating relationships. But we also look at this as a long game. That somebody who joins on my email newsletter may not convert into a lead for 3 or 5 years, or they may not convert at all. But that's fine. We're building those relationships for that moment in time when we can be of value.
Makes tons of sense. I think to what you said is like, I think a lot of businesses, they got to, base it on a strategy. Like, and originally I used to think, well, if it's a single product, that's probably not necessarily a great business to be producing a lot of content compared to, say, a travel company that really wants to showcase, the different places you could be, which makes it really natural to business. But I think what it comes down to is the core culture. The very first thing you brought up about branding, because if in your DNA you have people who are naturally creative, or the owner is really interested in that, and you have the capabilities, maybe resource wise, or you have the budget, and that's what you want to do, that might make sense. But it's unfortunate sometimes that businesses like, oh, I need to be creating all this content. You're like, you're going to pay too much money for this. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're better just doing an ad or focusing on word of mouth and relationship development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you're going to choose what fits you. I learned a long time ago. So coming in this world, I started digital marketing in 2004. I used to think that when I started out that you should just do what I'm doing. I'm blogging, I'm writing, I'm writing books, I'm speaking, I'm doing all this stuff, and look at all the success I'm creating. And then, but that was naive. That was naive to think that everyone can do what I am doing. And what I had to learn in my own maturing process was that you're going to choose the strategy that not only fits you as a business, but also fits your customers. And there's a reason that Google and Facebook are as large as they are, is that they are essentially catering to the largest common denominator and providing a methodology that works. So it's in many ways, it's to say you're going to choose the go-to-market strategy that fits you the best.
So in a lot of ways, what you're describing is for that type of business, that's what's sustainable for them, mm-hmm. because it's speaking to the resources they don't have, or the the capability, where it's just that makes the most sense. Bottom line, it works until it doesn't, I guess, with pricing. But then there's always going to be somewhere else. There's always going to be a low cost, no matter what place, to be able to connect with your audience. I mean, even if it goes back to good old fashioned door to door, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, for sure. And I look at myself, I'm a 2-person company, and I'm the primary billable resource for in terms of speaking and consulting and the way we grow our business. But to serve my content machine, I don't have enough hours in the day to do it all. So I have a full-time marketing manager. Her name's Sarah, who's brilliant. So she's helping me create content for social media. She manages Instagram. She's running our PR. And so she's doing all of that outreach. And so that supports the strategy. And having a book come out this fall, I need that noise and that energy in order to get a book into the market. But that's a personalized approach. But what I find is a lot of organizations are not taking that basic deliberate step to say, we need customers to grow. How are we going to attract and acquire those customers? It's not going to just happen because you say that. And so we're talking tactics right now in terms of pay-per-click versus content, but it's fundamental. Going back to the strategy, what are you building? How are you going to build it? What do you need to get there? And start to really think deliberately on your options, because that's the best part of being a marketer right now. You have all the content and all the options to do something really, really remarkable.
Yeah, that's what I like about your Instagram feed. So I have a question for you. Maybe I'm wrong. I have an assumption, but I'll tell you after. Mm-hmm. Is when you're posting on Instagram, you post a picture of a book, branding book, and then you highlight a quote. Are those books that you've read in research and development of your own book, or was that separate to this?
So those are books that I've read over years, and a few of them that Sarah and I have read together. So no, those are books that have influenced me over time that were totally separate for what we did on the brand new name project. So on Wednesday, I shared Denise Leon's book Fusion, and it's brilliant. Like Denise is a friend, and I've known her since her first book came out, What Great Brands Do. And what I love about her approach is that she is sharing ideas in terms of culture and employee development and how that intersects with brand. And so we want to share those ideas with our community. I think I very much look at my brand as a work in progress, and I'm inspired by all of the other authors and thought leaders around us. And so we're trying to just foster that community. Like, let's break the fourth wall and learn from each other.
Wicked. Yeah, I know. And here's my assumption, by the way, was I thought that was actually you sharing the process of your research for your book. So I was really intrigued whenever they pop up, I'm like, oh, cool. Is he going to have a chapter on that or something? So, but now that I've seen your book, some of it, I was just wondering if it was background information, but it's still cool. That's what I like about it. Is it always, it comes up your feed, it's tied into your brand, and I'm always interested, and you do a good job of
Thank you.
that. So it's awesome. So I
Thank
was
you.
wondering,
And it's fun. Like, I think that's a part of social media is, um, like, how do we connect with people and have conversations? Instagram is actually turning into my number one lead gen source, not through click throughs to the website, but from people DMing me and talking to me. So they just, you get a direct message and say, "Hey, Jeremy, I saw this. Can we talk about that?" And so that's what's so neat about social is when you take the human side of this, you can actually do some really cool things.
yeah, because I think that you're bringing them along in the process, or you're telling a story through a series of posts that are not necessarily connected in terms of a storyline, but they kind of fit together where people can kind of really start to understand a little bit what you do or why they'd want to talk to you.
Hmm.
And then there's people like me that blend their lifestyle and a little bit of my work in there. So people are like, do you surf, snowboard, hang out with Tony, or are you writing a book? So probably not helping myself on my own Instagram feed. I need to take some cues from you. So when it's
I
shift,
don't know. I think your approach is brilliant because we want to know the people behind the brand, and you do something that I'm not comfortable with. Like, I hate selfies. I hate doing that kind of recording. Like, I'm at an event, like maybe it's just me being too Gen Xy. It's just that's where I get squirrely, and so Sarah chips at me to actually bring more of myself out there. Like, we're trying to emulate you.
oh, well, thanks. Because funny, I actually feel the same way as you do. I don't think I put myself in front of the camera anywhere near as enough. Like I, I usually document, but I'm facing out. I don't really point the camera a ton at me, but and I always look at what other people do, and I'm like, man, I need to step it up. And I actually had a bit of a, I wouldn't say phobia, but I wasn't really comfortable with like having a selfie with iPhone and just talking to it. So I went to Michelle Soros. She's got a video group community. So you just share a post every day. And I actually did it. And it made a big difference in terms of me being comfortable with that. But if you put a camera, a professional camera, and you interview me, I have no problem. But it's something about holding the camera myself. I don't know. I have a little bit of a, with video anyways, I have a challenge with that. I don't know. I'm sure you can
I
relate.
think we're just showing our age.
Yeah, totally. One of the things I was really impressed by, getting to know you a little bit was, you've got a really smart strategic process for the way that you're building your business, your book, your content, and all those kind of things. And I was wondering if we could kind of talk a little bit about, maybe share with somebody else who's going through the same process. They're writing a book like myself. And, what are some of the lessons you've learned? Because you've got a successful book before called Sticky Branding. You got this one coming out. You got a lot of momentum. I think you're going to be wildly successful. What can someone learn that when they're listening to this, whether they can relate it to a book writing or their business, that you could share to kind of bring someone along?
Well, I think when it comes to book writing, my view of books is they are the greatest marketing tool you could ever ask for. Because David Meerman Scott said this to me. He said, writing a book is a reason to go on tour. It's like being a musician. So a musician brings out an album and then they go on tour, and that's where they make all their money. Being an author or a consultant, having a book is a reason to go out and speak. And when I wrote Sticky Branding, the strategy that underlied that was twofold. Number one, I wanted to create a product that created immense value. It wasn't about me speaking or anything related to my personal brand. It was simply to provide a tool to solve a problem that I had. So the book itself came from the idea of what's the product or the book I wish I had when I rebranded my family business. And so that gives a context to what it I was trying to do. But from a marketing context, I saw that book as a ticket to get into the stadium to be a professional speaker. And that's exactly what it did for me. That first year after the book came out, I did 30 professional paid speeches. Before that, I had been paid to speak, but I would have said I was an amateur speaker. I was mainly speaking for marketing. So my thought is if you have a book in you and you want to do this, I highly encourage you to do it. I think it is one of the most transformational things you can do for not only your business, but your life and yourself. But if you're going to do it right. A book is a product. So build the brand, build the strategy, build the tactics of what it is you're creating, because it's going to take a lot of time and effort to create. And then once that book comes out, just promote the hell out of it, because if you don't blow your own horn, nobody will. But it's that act of communicating and sharing that book. It will create a halo effect. It will generate paid speaking gigs. It will generate interest in your business. It'll open up opportunities for consulting or to sell product, whatever it is that you do. So yeah, if you've got this in you, chase it.
Right on. So the book's almost out. What's next for you?
In what sense? In what time frame?
Whatever time frame you want to share.
Okay. So I'll tell you the strategy. So brand new name comes out October 8th. We are working on the development of brand new name as a set of programs that are co-assigned with the book, so that you in the book, everything you need is there to name something, but it gets a little unwieldy if you have 10 or 20 or even 100 people involved in this. So coming this fall is all the software and programming you need to do that. So we're building up our programming to deliver services that are not dependent specifically on my time. The other thing that's big in the works is I'm writing a second edition of Sticky Branding, and hopefully we'll have that come to market late next year with another program associated with that. And so what we're trying to do as a business is provide really smart, effective marketing and branding processes that allow people to grow their brand without hiring an agency.
Beauty. And just for people who haven't read or heard of Sticky Branding, do you want to give a quick summary of what that's about?
Sure. So Sticky Branding is a branding playbook for small and medium-sized businesses. So for companies that have a marketing budget, but not a vast one. And in my case, it was written from the context of being a small family business that was going through a significant transformation. But what I did in terms of my own story is I also researched and profiled over 150 brands from around the world to discover how do mid-sized companies create sticky brands that are truly recognizable and move the needle. And the book is 12 and a half principles to show you exactly how to do that.
You mentioned David Miriam Scott. I actually just saw him speaking just about 4 days ago in Vegas, and he's actually going to be on the podcast. He's got a book coming out as well.
He's amazing.
Yeah, he's good, really good. The newsjacking strategy he's come up with is actually really smart. I don't know if you've heard of that at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think newsjacking is brilliant. I think his first book, The New Rules of PR and Marketing, are amazing. Like everything he has done is breathtaking. He actually provided a blurb for Sticky Branding, so I'm forever in his debt for that. But he's one of the best speakers on the circuit, and I think he's one of the guys to listen to when you want really practical, actionable marketing advice.
Ooh, you said it perfectly. He does. Like, he outlines it really succinctly. And his new presentation that I just saw, I didn't realize what a fan he is of music and how ingrained he is into going to live events and stuff like that. He's in his presentation, he's got a couple of stories that are just like unbelievable. I won't share them because I just butcher them. But if you ever get a chance to see him speak and on his new presentation that he's doing right now, it's very engaging. It's awesome.
I can't wait to see him speak. I haven't seen him speak in a few years, but he's one of my favorite speakers.
Do you have somebody doing the forward or commenting on your book now?
So we've collected blurbs from lots of different people. We're currently having 150 people read the book before launch, and then they're going to be posting reviews on Amazon when it comes out. But we've got fantastic reviews like Jake Knapp, who wrote Sprint, gave a blurb for the book, and I'm so grateful he did, because I am very influenced by the Sprint methodology, and we use a lot of the language and ideas from what he created in the Sprint methodology for Google Ventures. And so for him to endorse the book it just makes me feel so much pride.
Yeah, and you should be. I've read the book. It's incredible. I mean, I should just start off with just like, going on about it, but I just wanted it to unfold in our conversation, some of the things that you bring forward in the book. But it's a great playbook. It gives you a real solid sense of like actually going through the process that, man, it must have taken you a long time in all the years of your branding to like succinctly bring this down, because that's been a challenge with branding. Is it's a process. It's a significant one, and you've appeared to crack the code to bring the timeline down, which is incredible.
Thank you. Well, it's been a long journey. We started developing the methodology in 2016, and so it's been 3 years to bring this book to market.
It wouldn't surprise me in the least if you see agencies taking this as their new branding process, whether they'll admit it or not, because they always say they have proprietary branding process. But I almost guarantee you that almost every agency, so if you're listening and your agency is doing rebranding, it wouldn't surprise me if they're using this process, and you should get the book yourself so you can follow along.
Well, I take it a step further. We are actually partnering with agencies to deliver the brand new name methodology to their clients. And it's being delivered in two formats. One, we can deliver it so that you can provide it to a client and use employee co-creation to support them in the naming journey. We also have that methodology layered on with the current agency's naming and brand development process, so you get the best of both worlds, that you're doing employee co-creation plus your process together. And so if anyone is listening and they're thinking of how do we offer better naming service to our clients, I would love to chat.
Awesome. Well, let's just tell people where to find you and where they follow you.
Fastest way to find me, go to stickybranding.com or Google Sticky Branding. You'll find me on all the social networks at Sticky Branding, and the new book is Brand New Name, and it's available October 8th, wherever books are sold.
Brilliant. Dude, thank you so much for being on this show. This was an awesome episode. I feel like there's many other paths we could go down and chat more about, but this was really amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, I really appreciate it as well, and I love the work that you're doing and just the depth of your interview. So thanks for having me on.
Right on. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. That's another episode of the Groundswell Marketing Podcast. And if you need to reach me, just email me at scott@groundswell.marketing or find me on my social channels. And please leave some reviews and some comments. I'd love to hear any feedback you can possibly give me. And until next time, mahalo.